Chapter 7. When I came to after I blacked out, I didn't know where I was for a few seconds. All I knew was that a naked woman who had been wearing a ram's head was giving me head while I was slumped in a huge chair fit for a king. I looked over to a corner of the room and a guy was fucking a chick doggy style and her titties were bouncing in joyous unison. Next to them, two guys were sucking each other off. Was I tripping on acid? I felt like I was in a weird movie, a cross between A Midsummer Night's Dream and Satyricon. When I looked the other way, I felt some relief to recognize Ace, who was banging some chick in the corner. Then I remembered. We were shooting the cover for our second album with the great photographer Norman Seeff. Seeff had hired 20 women and 20 men to surround us in some elaborate medieval Gothic tableau. To lubricate the scene, the set was stocked with plenty of champagne, scotch, whiskey, rum, you name it. It might have been the scotch that gave me that temporary amnesia. It was certainly all that liquor that fueled what became more an orgy than a photo shoot. But as drunk as I was, Paul was even more sloshed, which was a rarity for a guy who was so concerned with losing his cool. He was lying half naked on a velvet bed, offering no resistance at all to the half-dozen girls and guys who were buzzing around him like bees drawn to honey. That's why Gene made his move. If one dick had gone into Paul's defenseless mouth or up his ass, there would have been 7 more dicks swarming. So Gene swooped in and grabbed Paul and carried him out of Dante's Inferno. He deposited him in the back seat of our rental car and locked the doors. Welcome to L.A. We had come out west to record our second album just a stone's throw from the offices of Casablanca Records. We were thrilled to be out in Hollywood. What was not to like? We were used to an asphalt jungle with towering buildings. Here we saw beautifully landscaped houses where movie stars lived. The weather was nice every day. Oh, and there were girls, an endless array of beautiful girls. We were working with Kenny Kerner and Richie Wise again, and the studio was beautiful and the vibe seemed great, but Gene especially just couldn't deal with the laid-back L.A. attitude. If we needed something in the studio fixed, we wanted it fixed immediately. Gene thought everyone in L.A. was a moron. They stay out in the sun too long, he used to scoff. We were a bunch of hyper New York workaholics who just wanted to capture our sound and then get back on the road. Besides, there were just too many temptations. Temptations for Ace and me in L.A. I thought we had a bunch of real good songs, but again the sound just wasn't being captured. The session seemed stale. It was the same old with these guys, only in a different room on a different coast. I didn't really push to get any of my songs on the album. I knew they weren't going to do any of them, they just weren't the kind of songs we were doing. But I did push to sing on the record. Paul had written a song, Mainline, that was perfect for me, but recording it was torturous. Paul would literally stand in front of my fucking face, making me sing it word for word and note for note the way he wanted it, which puts a bit of a damper on your creativity. In his best days he couldn't outsing me. He had no soul. Ace had written 2 songs for the album, but he didn't have the confidence to sing either of them. Gene and Paul could be quite intimidating, and Ace told me many times that they made him feel inadequate. But Ace would always push for me to sing his songs so that I could get a little bit of the spotlight. So I sang Strange Ways. I also thought that an extended drum solo was just the thing for that song. Of course, Gene and Paul wouldn't hear that. Why are you guys always right and I'm always wrong? I protested. Why can't I do a solo there? Well, it's pretty obvious that they would mumble. Yeah, but the fans may like it, I said. I was a solo guy. I loved doing them, and Strange Ways was the perfect vehicle for one. So I fought back the only way I knew how. If the solo goes, I quit the band, I threatened. Of course I was crying wolf, I just wanted some input into the process. I recorded a really good solo. But after my drum tracks were done, I never stayed around the studio, so, of course, they just cut the solo out. And I didn't quit. In fact, I was relatively happy. We were staying at the Sunset Marquis, a real rock and roll hotel in West Hollywood. When the recording was done, Paul and I jumped from our second-story balcony into the pool. Even Gene jumped in, wearing his huge monster boots and heavy leather. Ace didn't partake. He was recovering from getting pissed one night and driving around the same block in the Hollywood Hills, faster and faster, until he wrapped his rental car around a telephone pole. I remember sitting up on my balcony at the hotel and playing the tape of Hotter Than Hell over and over. It felt so great to have 2 albums under our belts. And despite our occasional differences, it was still fun to be around each other. We would make each other laugh for hours and hours. We were all such different people, but we were united in one goal. We toured behind the album from October 1974 until February 1975. We were still working on our live show, and sometimes there would be bumps in the road. One of our signature moves then was to have my drumsticks explode. Neil was a big Magic fan and he loved flash paper, so we devised special sticks that were hollow and made out of white copper. We packed the sticks with flash paper and put in an ignite switch so I'd have a nice finale at the end of show, blasting balls of fire out over the audience. Other than the exploding drumsticks, though, we didn't have much firepower at that point in our career. Sean had rigged up a couple of flash pots, but that was about it. Eventually we had enough shit to blow a stadium up. If you stepped in the wrong place on that stage on the wrong night, you were dead. I never trusted that shit. All those pyro guys were nuts. They'd be handling the dynamite and they'd have a lit cigarette dangling out of their mouths. I found it hard enough to control my little drumsticks. Sometimes one would go off and the other wouldn't. Sometimes they'd just peter out and hit the front of the stage. Other times, they'd misfire and go backward. We had a much worse accident a few weeks later. We were in Springfield, Illinois, playing a National Guard armory of all places. Our roadie Moosey, a really nice, big Italian kid, was responsible for loading up my exploding sticks. We were in the dressing room putting on our makeup when all of a sudden we heard a loud boom. "What the fuck was that?" I said. Suddenly Moosey came running into the room with half of his hand hanging off. There was blood shooting everywhere and there was white, briny stuff leaking out. It looked like a Quentin Tarantino movie. We found out later that unused powder had accumulated in one of the sticks and he was using a screwdriver to scrape it away when it ignited and blew his hand up. I grabbed a towel and wrapped it around his hand. "We gotta cancel the show. I have to go to the hospital with Moosey," I said. The rest of the guys talked me out of it. They were right. It was a sold-out show and we couldn't let those fans down. I couldn't wait for the show to end so I could check on Moosey. He underwent emergency surgery and they were able to save his hand, but it never functioned properly again. We paid for his bills and Bill threw him a few bucks and made him sign a waiver so we couldn't get sued. On that tour we wound up playing in Detroit on my birthday. After the show, they threw me a nice party that seemed to have a drug theme. I got all this drug paraphernalia like coke spoons and vials and hash pipes. And our great road crew, the renegade bikers, cooked some Alice B. Tokeless brownies that were made with hash and grass. The road crew knew this, Paul and Ace and I knew this, but Gene had no idea. This was a man who had never gotten high once in his life. But he loved sweets. So Gene wolfed down about 6 brownies and left the party with a female rock journalist. Later that night, the phone in my room rang. "Peter, this is Jean. I don't know what's happening to me. My hands are shrinking and my face won't fit in the mirror." Jean was freaking out, so he called me up. I was the guy who knew all about drugs, right? I had to keep from laughing. "Jean, did you eat any of those brownies at the party?" "Yes, I had about 6 of them," he said. "Well, they were dosed with pot," I told him. "You're just high. You got that girl with you. Get into some sex with her and you'll forget all about the size of your head." A few minutes later the phone rang again. "It's not wearing off." "It's getting worse," Jean worried. I didn't have the heart to tell him that the high from eating pot lasts a lot longer than from smoking it. "You're fighting it? Stop fighting and just enjoy the high," I said. "Oh, God, I'm going to overdose." "You won't overdose. You're not going to die. Just have fun with that chick." But her face is starting to melt. I guess it wore off, because he didn't call again that night. I saw him in the lobby the next morning and he looked shaky. "I will never eat another brownie in my life," he said. Meanwhile, Hotter Than Hell had been released, but it tanked. Our live shows were dynamite, but we still hadn't figured out how to capture that sound on vinyl. And I still hadn't figured out why we were using lame producers like Kerner and Wise when we could have used Eddie Kramer. But that soon became a moot point. Casablanca hadn't been paying us any royalties at all, and Bill was basically financing our touring with his American Express card. After Hotter Than Hell disappeared, we had a meeting with Kerner and Wise, the band, and Bill and Joyce. Kerner and Wise told us that they had a major offer from another label to take the band with them as producers to do our next album. It's likely that they didn't know that Joyce was seeing Neil, so the next day, Neil got wind of this, fired Kerner and Wise, and decided that he was going to produce the next album. Nobody had been able to capture our sound, but the great Bogart would. Now, I love Neil, but he had never produced anything in his life. He had one minor hit as a singer when he was young, but that doesn't make you a producer. Still, he was the head of the record company and he decided we needed to go back to our roots and record not only in New York City but at Electric Lady, so I was pretty jazzed. We went into the studio the first week of February 1975. The first executive decision Neil made as producer was to bring along a pound of weed. You couldn't walk into that room without getting a contact high. I was dizzy 24/7 during those sessions. Jean and Paul didn't even realize that they were high. Jean would order 4 dozen donuts and chow down on them constantly. You don't really want to record an entire album stoned on pot. All of us, especially Neil, were hearing things that just didn't fucking exist on the tape. I distinctly remember playing on a few cuts and thinking to myself, Jesus, I am fucked up. But there was nothing we could have done about it. What were we going to do? Tell the president of our record company to stop smoking his joints? Once again I thought the songs were good. I figured as long as the material was up to par, everything would come out okay, but it didn't. It came out like shit. But opinions of music are very subjective. A lot of our fans would later tell me that Dressed to Kill was our best album. It certainly had one of our best ever songs on it. Neil was urging us to write an anthem, and Paul came up with Rock and Roll All Night. You can hear it today at just about any sporting event in the world. I got to sing an Ace song, Getaway, because Ace was still too shy to sing. And I was still a little gun, shy to push my songs on the other guys. Although we seemed to be attracting a very devoted fan base, we still were scuffling as an opening act. In May we played on the campus of Ohio Northern University, and after the show a faculty member saw us walking around the campus. She figured we were typically broke college students, so she gave all of us lunch passes. The student council didn't even have money for us to get a hotel room, so we slept in the dorms that night. I stayed with two crazy science majors who were synthesizing their own LSD. They wanted me to trip, but they settled for staying up all night and smoking pot with me. In the middle of May we decided to record our live show. We picked Cobo Hall, a venue in Detroit. We had played Cobo before and it was a great hall, plus the promoter was very generous with his blow. Detroit was a lot like New York City in a way. They either loved you or they totally hated you. If they hated you, you were dead meat. They'd hit you with lettuce, tomatoes, eggs, whatever. But Detroit loved Kiss and they took us under their wing, especially the females. It was the ideal place to record live, and we sold the joint out and the crowd went crazy. In a lot of ways, Detroit turned a bunch of green kids into men, and we'll always be indebted to that town. By June we were back out on the West Coast. After playing one show with Billy Preston and trashing his stage with blood and debris, we were thrown off his tour. The problem was Bill had almost maxed out his credit card, so he couldn't afford to get us back to New York. So the plan was for us to check into a cheap hotel in the Bay Area and regroup, then get on another tour. We wound up at the Vagabond Inn, which was smack in the middle of the gayest section of San Francisco. We were totally depressed. We actually began to think that the circus was over and we'd just hang out there until we could go back to New York with our tails between our legs. I figured that this was the time to get strong. I clicked into survivor mode. If it was going to be over, then let's go out with a smile. It was ironic that I of all people, the one who was usually the most depressed of the depressed, took it upon myself to cheer up the band. Ace and Jean had a room on the second floor and Paul and I shared a room downstairs. Each room had a kitchen in it. That first night I said to Paul, let's do something cool. Let's open up a restaurant. We can call it the Gay Kitchen, and we'll be the gay chefs and cook up a meal and invite the guys down for dinner. That's great, man, Paul said. I'll do the menu. And he drew up this beautiful menu, full of gay double entendres, with each item on the menu corresponding to a different guy in the band or in the crew. There was, Tall Paul's Big Ball Scallop Slick Mix Big Dig Special the Spoiler Omelets, and for the ace in the hole, why not try the Closet Burger? Soul food anyone? Try Junior's Black Oak in the Can You'll Like It? Italian food? Get Gino's Bloody but Hearty Pizza. It's not big, but it's filling. The above items come with the cook of the day, you can't beat that one, kids. Prices according to size. I had to give it to Paul. We were always busting his chops about his femininity, but here he was, camping it up with me and creating this little bit of theater. We were broke, but my grandfather George, the coxswain, lived nearby and he was eager to help us out. He and his seventh wife brought us shopping bags stocked with hot dogs, eggs, beans, rice, Ronnie and mac and cheese. So we whipped that up, and then I went up to Ace and Jean's room. Dinner will be served at 6 p.m. Sharp downstairs in the gay kitchen, I lisped. They loved it. The two of them combed their hair, put on nice button-down shirts, and came down. I greeted them at the door, had them sit down at a table that we covered with a checkered cloth, and gave them the hand-drawn menus. When we served the food and sat down to eat with them, we never broke character. Jean and Ace laughed their balls off. We kept the gay kitchen open for the 6 days that we were stranded there, and by then Bill had booked us to open for another headliner and we were back on the road. But we were still dirt poor. Gene stole a fake leather bedspread from our hotel in Vegas and used it at each hotel we'd check into. Paul was worse. He routinely stole and stockpiled toilet paper and brought it home when the tour was over. He even brought his dirty clothes along at the beginning of a tour so we would pay for his laundering. I wasn't innocent, either. I made sure there would be extra scotch on the band's rider, and by the end of the tour I'd have about 7 bottles of Johnny Walker to take home with me. I also had my little eccentricities when it came to sleeping. I had to have my own pillows, so Lydia made a special duffel bag to carry them in. And my mom embroidered Mickey and Minnie Mouse on the pillowcases. But I had nothing on Ace when it came to being eccentric. At one point, Ace began to recite jokes into a small tape recorder. Then he would come up to me, say, "Hey cat, listen to this," play back the joke while he lip synced to it, and then burst out laughing. He graduated from that to a little laugh box. We'd be on a plane or in a car and suddenly you'd hear this hysterical laughing coming from the box and Ace would join right in. Before he would eat anything, Ace would have to smell it to make sure he wouldn't get food poisoning. Gene even nicknamed him the chef. I remember one time Lydia asked him about that and pointed out that we never smelled our food before we ate and we never got food poisoning. Blame it on the bossa nova, Ace just shrugged. He would always come up with these non sequiturs like 13 for a dozen. Half the time you had no idea what the fuck Ace was saying. Later on, when we were raking in a lot more money, Ace began to shoot home movies. By this time we had taken on a lawyer and business managers who were all Jewish. Ace would invite all of us up to his house for a party and then screen these home videos that he and his pal Bobby made. We'd sit around the TV and, all of a sudden, Ace would walk into the room wearing a full SS uniform complete with red swastika, hat, and a lugger. "You will watch my movie," he'd say, and then he'd show these movies with Ace and his friends in Nazi uniforms torturing other friends who were dressed like the Jewish in a concentration camp. I'd be watching and then I'd look over at our managers and Paul Marshall, our lawyer, and they'd just look appalled. And everybody put up with it. By then he was making so much money for them, what were they going to say? In September of 1975, our lives were forever changed. That was when our live album Alive was finally released. It was a crazy time for us. We had tried and failed 3 times to capture the vibrancy and immediacy of the band on record. We were a huge, sounding heavy metal band on the road, but on the albums we sounded so small. So when Eddie Kramer agreed to come out on tour with 2 trucks to record us, we were ecstatic. There had been financial considerations, too. It was a lot cheaper to record a live album than a new studio one. We were still waiting on our royalty statements from Casablanca. Neil had mortgaged his house to keep his company afloat because he had severed his distribution ties with Warner Brothers Records. Our lawyers had sued Neil for the back royalties, and it was getting ugly. It got so bad that back in New York, Bill was relying on friends who were taking turns to take him out to dinner. Alive would change all that. Although it was crafted to sound like it was recorded in one night at Cobo Hall in Detroit, we actually recorded a bunch of shows. Then Kramer went back to New York and began culling the best performances. Picking out the best drum tracks was the first step. Once you had the drum track, then you could sweeten everything else. If you had to throw on a new lead, you could throw on some bass, add some rhythm guitar, all possible. In the end we wound up keeping only my drum tracks, my vocals, and Paul's between-song raps. Everything else was re-created in the studio. Recording was a necessity, not any kind of subterfuge. Every band that's ever put out a live album does it. When you record live, there's always leakage, unless you get lucky. Sometimes guitars would go out of tune or you'd sing out of key. I would always go up an octave when I was singing Black Diamond Live because I'd get so excited. Finally, I got to hear one of my drum solos on a record. My solo on 100,000 Years was scary, if I say so myself. It's probably the best drum solo that I've ever done. I used mallets and flangers to give it a cooler, different, deeper, almost outer space sound. We hit the road as soon as Alive came out. About a month into the tour, we scored one of the greatest publicity coups of all time. It all went back a year in time. In 1974, the Cadillac Vikings, the football team of Cadillac High School in Cadillac, Michigan, lost their first 2 games of the season. The head coach decided to play rock music before the game to pump up the players. The assistant coach, Jim Neff, chose to play our albums. Naturally, the team went on to win 7 straight games. Neff got in touch with Alan Miller, who worked for Bill, and after a year of back and forth, we agreed to make Cadillac a stop on our tour and play the homecoming concert in the school's gym. We couldn't believe our eyes when we got to Cadillac that day. It was like living in Kiss World. Everybody was in our makeup, even the politicians and the people who worked behind the counters at the local McDonald's. We rode on a big float in the homecoming parade down a street that had been renamed Kiss Boulevard. The mayor gave us the key to the city. We took pictures with the football team. During halftime, I got on the football field and played along with the drum corps on Rock and Roll All Night. We had a ball. And we carried along a sizable number of press people who broke it into an international story. Because Bill knew the story had major legs, he lectured us before we left. I had the feeling he was mainly talking to Gene. Be really cool when you're there, he counseled. Don't sleep with the mayor's wife, don't sleep with his daughter. Stay away from the chief of police's daughter. I still think Gene fucked someone, but he was very discreet. After 2 days, we left on an army helicopter from the stadium and dropped thousands of leaflets on the football field that read "Kiss loves you." Of course, the Vikings won that homecoming game. About a month after Cadillac, we presided over the official inauguration of the Kiss Army, which would become the greatest fan club in rock and roll history. The whole concept for the Kiss Army was formed at the beginning of 1975 when 2 teenagers from Terre Haute, Indiana, Bill Starkey and Jay Evans, began haranguing the program director of WVTS, a local radio station, to play Kiss music. The program director blew them off again and again, telling them that Kiss was a fag band, until the 2 kids started sending letters threatening to blow up the station and actually picketed the station, claiming to be representing the Kiss Army. By July, WVTS had added Kiss to its playlist and kept referring to the Kiss Army for requesting it. Somehow Alan Miller, whom we nicknamed Little Bill because he dressed identically to Bill Aucoin, got wind of this, and with his genius flair for publicity decided we should go to Terre Haute and give Starkey, who was the self-proclaimed general of the Kiss Army, a plaque. On stage. He also coordinated pre-show publicity, and Starkey and his pal Evans called into WVTS nightly to hype the show. And thanks to these 2 kids, we managed to sell out a new 21,000-seat arena, something that even Aerosmith couldn't do. So when we got to Terre Haute, we were treated like visiting dignitaries. The local army base provided a jeep escort for us from the airport to downtown, where they had a huge parade, the Kiss Army meets the U.S. Army. Again, Aucoin was way ahead of us on this. You're the generals, and your army needs you, he lectured us. You have to go out there and show the kids that you really love them, that you believe in what they believe. From these humble origins, the Kiss Army spread like wildfire. Which just goes to show the devotion of our fans. A Kiss Army. Who ever heard of a Led Zeppelin army or a Rolling Stones army? This was some serious adulation. And the timing was right. We had just given them a national anthem with rock and roll all night. We began to close with that song and dropped thousands of pounds of confetti and balloons all over the audience. We had turned our show into a magnificently chaotic party. Soon we couldn't stay at a hotel without the Kiss Army invading it. They would storm the hotel en masse in their homemade costumes and makeup and sit in the lobby and chant song names over and over again: Firehouse, Firehouse, Black Diamond, Black Diamond. Then they'd start chanting our individual names. Of course the hotel management didn't take too kindly to this, and the police were called every night. After a few minutes, the cops would disperse the crowd and the staff would stick us with the cleanup bill. I could feel the tide turning. I remember one night we were opening for Dr. John. We were waiting to go on when Mac, that's his real name, came into our dressing room. He had just gone through a bunch of shit. One of his buses got into a pileup and some of his wardrobe got messed up. "Hey, look it," he said in his deep New Orleans patois. "You guys don't have to open for me. I'll go on first because I'll tell you what, I ain't an idiot. Those people ain't here to see me. This ain't no blues audience, they got war paint on their faces. So let me get my boys out there now and we'll do our thing. Good luck." And he reversed the order and went on first and then left. He was truly a cool cat. Gene had become the de facto leader of the group because he would do most of the interviews. With his blood spitting and fire eating, he became the visual focal point of the group and was the most photographed. All of us, especially Paul, were beginning to resent Gene's dominance. They even met with Bill about it, and Gene calmly told Paul that Paul should be more assertive, not that Gene should tone anything down. Gene was right, but then Paul began to step in front of Gene routinely on stage. Once he did that, Gene would fade. Paul could steal the spotlight from him like that. As we got more popular, a new monster was created. Paul always had a problem with carving out his own identity. Whatever someone else had, whether it was a car or, ultimately, a house, Paul would buy the same thing for himself. But now that we were drawing bigger audiences and Paul was moving out front more, he became the focal point. He'd get more letters from chicks. More people started wearing his makeup. And it built to a point where he just fell in love with himself. But Paul would never blatantly assert his authority. He was a major game player, a puppet master. He would let Gene verbalize his feelings and desires. Suddenly it became whatever Paul wanted, Paul got. He was a master at mind games. I guess that's what 4 hours a day of talking to your shrink will do for you. The worst, though, was when Gene and Paul worked in tandem to assert their authority over me and Ace. They always claimed that they encouraged Ace and me to contribute songs or to sing, but they made it clear that there was a true pecking order in the band. Paul was the lead singer, Gene was the second lead, and they would write most of the material. After a while, they threw us a bone and we'd each get a song on an album. But Gene to this day asserts that the doors were always open for Ace and me, but we just didn't deliver. We delivered, they just didn't accept. I was still writing with Stan Penridge, but no matter what I brought to them, it wasn't right for that particular record. Even their collaborations eventually came to an end. I always found that writing with a partner was the best way to write. And Gene and Paul's early Kiss stuff was fantastic. But then the ego set in and they separated as writers, and the songs just weren't as good. Paul started collaborating with other writers like Desmond Child, and he flat out wrote better songs than Gene. As a drummer, I had a lot more fun playing Paul's songs than Gene's. The songwriter and song selection were just one manifestation of the power that Gene and Paul always seemed to want to wield. As their power grew, their egos grew correspondingly. Their egos compelled them to make sure that they were in total control of themselves. That's why the two of them really never got hot. Gene was frightened that he would lose control and do something embarrassing. Paul smoked some pot early on and took a few white crosses, which he used to sneak onto the road, but he also didn't want to blow his cool. They'd laugh at Ace and me all the time and look down on us. Ace was just a clown, a space cadet, and I was the hard-edged Italian illiterate. They would have spelling contests to while away the time, they said, but they knew it irritated me because I wasn't as literate as they were. We all knew it, so why do it if you're going to hurt one of your buddies, one of your band members? Gene would say, Ace, spell predicament. Ace would reply, fuck you, you spell predicament. Then Paul would go, Peter. And I'd say, you know I can't spell well, so you have to remind me of that. You don't think that hurts, motherfuckers. And they'd go, Peter, it's only a game. It was a game. The let's fuck with Peter's brain game. The only way I knew how to respond to them was to be brutal. And my own monster would come out and I'd threaten to hurt them. That's all I had in my arsenal. I didn't have the words to put them down. I didn't have the education to stand up to them. But I knew how to kick ass. They were master manipulators. Ace and I weren't. Gene admits now that if he and Paul wanted to do something and Ace and I didn't, they would emotionally batter us. So we were emotional wrecks, too unstable to help make decisions that affected our lives, and their Gestapo tactics were justified to bring us in line with what they thought was right for the group. When Gene was nice to me and treated me as an equal, there was nothing that I wouldn't do for him. There was a sweet side to Gene. Lydia used to pack ring-dings, Twinkies, and devil dogs for me to take on the road. And Gene has a huge sweet tooth. Many times after a show, I'd invite Gene to my room and we'd sit there with a quart of milk and some Twinkies or ring-dings and we'd watch cartoons together. He was the only other guy I knew who drank his milk with ice cubes in it. But when he started that fucking power, tripping, game, playing shit with Paul, I had to resort to my street bravado. If they tried to bulldoze me or push me around, I'd go Peter Criss on them. Do that again and I'll break the table over your fucking head, I'd threaten. I put up a tough front, but deep down I was a softie. It's easy to hurt me if you know how, and I usually let people know how. That was always my problem. When I do let someone get close to me, I'll tell them all of my business, all my problems, my whole life story. And it is definitely bad to open yourself up to people who are Machiavellian enough to use that information against you and push your buttons. So whenever I showed my sensitive side, Gene and Paul were there to jab at the heart I had just exposed. Underneath the makeup, we all really knew each other. But somewhere along the line, as we got more popular, we lost our compasses. The magnificent journey became just a job and then a nightmare for both Ace and me. The myth of early Kiss was that there were two groups within the group. There was the Gene and Paul group, the sane, straight, level-headed members who shunned booze and drugs and who propelled the band forward with their business acumen. Then there was the Peter and Ace group, the wild and crazy musically creative guys. We would have business meetings and I would, in my usually crude way, seek to debunk that myth. I would actually be sober at these meetings and proceed to explain that the emperors had no clothes. I drink and drug, Ace drinks and drugs, Bill drinks and drugs, Sean drinks and drugs, so naturally Gene and Paul's way is the right way. One of these fuckfaces is sitting here throughout the whole meeting drawing huge, anatomically correct dicks. This other fuckface, all he can think about is getting the fuck out of here and getting laid. And their way is the highway that we all should travel on? Like we didn't get on this road because Ace and I were bad boys? I'm so fed up with you hypocritical motherfuckers. So this was the state of our union when Alive went gold, and then platinum, and propelled us to stardom. Once we finally put out an album that truly reflected the majesty of our live shows, the walls came tumbling down and the stadiums opened up for us. For good reason. As far as I was concerned, we were the best show on the fucking planet. My band would give you every last penny's worth of your ticket price. We had a guy eating fire, a guy levitating into the air, a guitar that shot rockets, and a front man as good as the best of them. It was literally a rock and roll circus. And who could resist a circus? Halfway through the Alive tour, we were informed that we would be rich beyond our dreams. All I ever wanted was a gold record on my wall and a nice living. Maybe sign a couple of autographs when I went out to eat with Lydia. I had no idea that we would become bigger than life itself. I was thrilled for Bill. We signed a new deal with Casablanca and we got a lump, some payment as an advance. Bill had invested so much time and effort, maxing out his Amex card to make us stars, that he couldn't pay his rent and had to rely on friends to eat. And now he was sitting in his office, staring at a check from Neil for $2 million. One of the first things Bill did was move out of the offices he had shared with some business partners for years and rent a magnificent new office for $70K a month. Then he told Lydia and me to move to Manhattan. Our dream had always been to live in a brownstone in the city, so Sean took Lydia out in a limo one day and they found a cute little brownstone on 30th Street, complete with a spiral staircase and a fireplace. We put that first gold album over the fireplace in the living room. Then I went out and bought myself a chocolate, brown Camaro. For her part, Lydia was ecstatic. She had paid her dues, too, working all those years at Abercrombie & Fitch, paying all the bills. Now she could quit her job. Kiss Mania was just starting. We had our first smash single off Alive, Rock and Roll All Night. We did rock and roll all night and party every day for many, many years to follow. And it almost killed me.